Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Star Wars Retrospective. I am JDOmnislash, and we are about to get into some weird territory. Splinter of the Mind's Eye is always an interesting topic for Star Wars discussions. For one thing, it was the first book to become part of the Star Wars Expanded Universe, which most of these videos will be focusing on, and the first piece of new Star Wars material we all received after the success of A New Hope. Yes, for those who don't know, this book was actually written, once again, by Alan Dean Foster, writer of the New Hope novelization, in February of 1978. So that is over 2 years before The Empire Strikes Back even existed. So what was this all about? Why was it even made in the first place? Well, according to Foster, in an interview with Empire, George Lucas wanted Foster to write up a story for a potential low-budget sequel, just in case the original Star Wars movie didn't succeed in its sales. It also explains the majority of the story taking place on a dark, foggy swamp planet. You know, low budget, you want to keep it in one location, etc. With that said, could this planet, Sarkarparus 5, I believe it's pronounced, have been an inspiration for Dagobah? Perhaps, though it's kind of hard to say, but the similarities are definitely there. Though a swamp is a swamp is a swamp. Alright, so limiting the scope of where we can go in the story due to budget constraints does not automatically mean we will get a lousy story, right? No, of course not. So how did it all turn out? Surely it couldn't be that bad, could it? Have a seat, Padawans. Much to discuss there is. So, the story goes like this. Luke joins Leia, R2, and 3PO on a trip to the planet Sarkarparus 5, planning to talk with potential rebels and get them to join the cause of the Alliance. A weird energy storm causes them to crash land. After regrouping to look for help, they come to a mining town with a, gasp, mine in it, whoa, secretly being run by the Empire. Here's where things start getting weird. So around this point in the story, an Imperial becomes suspicious of Luke and Leia, and begins walking over to them. Luke decides in the heat of the moment that the best way to not get caught is... You with me now? Alright. Is to pretend that Leia is actually a servant of his, right? Okay, you still with me? No? That's okay. So how does he convince the Imperials that Leia is a servant? Why? By smacking her across the face as she was about to leave, of course, and shouting, "No favors for you until I am finished eating!" I'm going to leave you with a minute to process what I just said, since your brain probably just turned into scrambled eggs as a result of it. And the saddest part about all of this, it worked! It actually worked. It's just, I can't. So after that brilliantly executed plan, Luke and Leia encounter an old woman named Hala, who immediately notices that Luke is strong with the Force. Outside of her hilarious obsession with calling Luke boy in every sentence, she provides him a piece of what's called the Kyber crystal. She tells them that she's looking for the rest of it, and will agree to help them get off the planet if they help her. The Kyber crystal, without going into too many details, allows a Force user's abilities to become magnified. This is also the reason it becomes of interest to the Imperials, or particularly Darth Vader. Yes, Darth Vader is also in the story, you see him there on the cover, despite not actually showing up, let alone even being mentioned in this book until more than 3/4 of the way into it. As Luke and Leia begin to leave, Leia decides that now is the perfect time to get revenge on Luke for what I'm now going to call the servant girl smackdown, and kicks him in the shins, making him fall into some mud. Then they proceed to get into a weird mud wrestling fight. Ew. Let's seriously get the quotes on this. There was no reply. That in itself was encouraging. They trudged on, Luke stealing admiring glances at her when she wasn't looking. Ugh. Awkwardly pressed up against him, the princess seemed to take no notice of their proximity. In the dampness, though, her body heat was near palpable to Luke, and he had to force himself to keep his attention on what he was doing. Ew. At the same time, the princess grew aware of how tightly she was clinging to him. Their proximity engendered a wash of confused emotion. It would be proper to disengage, to move away a little. Proper, but not nearly so satisfying. She was utterly drained, and the comfort she derived from leaning against him was worth any feeling of impropriety. Ew! Look, I get it. We didn't know they were brother and sister yet, so this wasn't supposed to come off so creepy, but... Ew! Did I mention George Lucas approved this entire story? I'm okay. I'm okay. I am going to get through this! So some miners come to them, telling them that public fighting is against Imperial law, before immediately proceeding to get into a public fight with them. After this, they all get arrested by the Imperials, well, except for Hala, R2, and 3PO at least. Yeesh. After being questioned by Captain Supervisor Grammel, a guy who's made to sound way more important than he actually is, Hala breaks Luke and Leia out, and they finally begin the real plot of the story, which is finding the rest of the dang crystal. The majority of the book from this point forward consists of Luke and Leia traveling together, fighting random creatures, including a giant worm at one point, and displaying more of that awkward sexual tension we were just talking about before. Look, I know George Lucas claims that allowing this tension was all part of his master plan for the story, but with the way he allowed things to play out in this book, as well as the way he had the two of them behave, even in The Empire Strikes Back, I just find it harder and harder to believe. So, Luke, Leia, and the gang eventually reach an underground city where they encounter a tribe called the Kowei, I think that's how it's pronounced, in which Luke eventually has to fight, gladiator style, against one of their people in order to protect everybody. After this is all over, Luke suddenly senses Darth Vader's presence, because I guess they decided that the story had to escalate after 3/4 of the way into this book or so. A lot of interesting things occur from this point on. Note that I didn't say good, I said interesting. There's a difference. After we see some sequences of the Kowei fighting with stormtroopers, slightly similar to what we'd eventually see between the Ewoks and stormtroopers in Return of the Jedi, we learn that Vader knew all the proper code words and commands to shut down C-3PO. Why is that so interesting to me? Well, sure, it makes sense that he would know, since he literally created the droid, but keep in mind that up to this point, we had no idea that Vader was going to turn out to be Anakin Skywalker, the father of Luke Skywalker. And frankly, I'm not even sure if Lucas knew that, so that makes this little section all the more interesting to me. A really surprising moment occurs just as Luke becomes immobilized due to a giant rock holding him down, as you can actually see here on the cover picture. So Leia actually picks up Luke's lightsaber and begins to fight Darth Vader. Unfortunately, she doesn't last very long and goes right back into the damsel in distress trope that she was already thrown into throughout the rest of this book. I think Foster even compared her yell to that of a steel kitten before. What the hell, Foster? The battle between Luke and Vader is also quite different from the one that we came to know in Empire Strikes Back. For one thing, Luke is an absolute powerhouse in this one. He trades Vader blow for blow, and even manages to slice off one of his robotic arms. Then there was also a confusing section where Luke literally says, "I am Obi-Wan." What? Did Obi-Wan help him in this fight? Is Luke using that to say, "I am that to which you fear"? I mean, I have absolutely no idea what that means. Honestly, up until finally reaching their destination, which was the Temple of Pomajima in this case, again, assuming that's how it's pronounced, I actually found a lot of this story to be kind of dull. Why? Well, it's absolutely riddled with old sci-fi cliches and tropes that you'd typically get at the time, which was the 70s in this case, the mid to late 70s. In fact, I'd say this whole thing felt more like a standard 70s sci-fi novel that just happened to feature Star Wars characters in it. Luke and Leia were both extremely out of character here, with Vader's dialogue being one of the only saving graces. Leia was a damsel in distress character, which doesn't fit her narrative with A New Hope, and Luke was your typical hothead sci-fi hero, and the whole thing just really made no sense at all. That's not to say the book was all bad either. I actually enjoyed most of Vader's dialogue, as I said, as he had some pretty chilling lines that fit his character well. I also liked the idea of the Kyber crystal, as the whole thing felt quite literally like a red kryptonite type of situation. I kind of regret the fact that we didn't get to hear much about this crystal beyond this one novel. We got a few mentions in, say, the Clone Wars series and some of the video games like Knights of the Old Republic, but that was about it. And despite the way that it all panned out, I did love the fact that we finally got to see Leia pick up a lightsaber and even strike at Darth Vader with it. I can't help but wonder if this was an inspiration behind the now famous scene of Rey grabbing the lightsaber to fight Kylo Ren in Force Awakens. Might be reaching a bit with that one, but I don't think it's necessarily impossible either. And some other fun facts to mention before we go. Mimban, which was the alternate name for Sarkarparus 5, is also the name of one of the planets featured in the recent Solo: A Star Wars Story movie. On top of that, it's been mentioned in the Clone Wars series before as well. Han Solo was not in the story because Harrison Ford had not yet been signed on for any sequels, and it was uncertain whether or not he'd actually be returning. Darth Vader's lightsaber in the novel is described as being blue. While I can't say I recommend this book to everyone, as it's objectively got more bad than good in it, I do still recommend it to those who want to explore this interesting bit of Star Wars history. It's fun in places, if you can get past the tropes, odd displays of sexism, and the fact that Hala can't stop calling Luke boy every 5 seconds, just like Kratos. And now I'm going to leave the rest up to all of you. What did you think of this book? Did you love it, hate it, maybe feel somewhere in the middle about it? Either way, I'd love to know all your thoughts as well. As always, thank you for watching, and please remember to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you want to keep seeing more fun content from me. And thanks as always, and take care.